Thanks everybody. Thanks everybody for coming. I see a lot of open eyes. So despite the lunch, everybody is still awake, and I hope not to change this with this talk. Well, first, welcome everybody. If I'm a bit more mechanical, then it's because I have to navigate the mic and this one. Sorry for that. Usually I'm more expressive with my hands. But welcome everybody, and today I'm going to talk about Agile Leadership and the training we have been developing. And as always, everything starts with a why. But before we come to the why, I'm going to show you names and faces of a lot of other people. These are the people of my team. And 4 of them are not here, but if you do the math, you think, okay, 6 people, I'm here. Who else is here? Pablo Sanchez, my direct colleague here, raising his hand, based in Madrid, from Argentina, which means for the audience here, if you would like to chat about the same topic in Spanish, feel free to contact them later. There are a lot of opportunities. The reason I show this slide first without the story arc is behind a success, usually there's not a single person, an individual, that is a whole team of people, and it's only decent to showcase everybody who was involved. This is already the first meta lesson about Agile leadership. Most of the time, success in a complex field is based on people working together and bringing in their different talents. So these are some of the people who made this actually possible, and you can contact us. I'll show you the email address later. Now, let's talk about the most important thing also for leaders, the why. Why did we do this? And in case you haven't shown the teaser, you haven't seen the teaser this morning, this is a typical picture of how a company actually works. If you look at the end-to-end flow of potential value through the system that is your company, you see teams that are deemed to be agile, and they can turn any idea that is already prioritized and found to be valuable into something that is a package that can be put on production within 2 or 3 weeks. That's not the challenge anymore, and if the team needs to work in a different way, they can find it. The people are good enough for this, they're ready, there are enough methods and so on, that we have practices and so on. But everything around them, the stuff up front, how fast do we decide, how fast do we do innovation? We had another talk about this innovation, hypothesis, qualifying, and later on, if we have this package, how fast can we put it on production, give it to the customer actually getting paid for it, and learn from the experience. So the overall flow, that can take still a long time. And guess what? That's not what teams usually can change. This is where you need leadership. And leadership is for the bigger picture and for the whole thing. That's actually the why. And you might say, yeah, but Agile leadership, isn't that an oxymoron? Wasn't Agile against leadership? It's quite the opposite. And we're going to do this in a radical way. We're going to look at the Agile Manifesto. So we're going to look back to the roots. And the Agile Manifesto does say, and I always quote only parts of it because it's a document you can read in 5 minutes online, so that's not how we're going to spend our time today here. But it says, in regular intervals, people reflect on how they are doing and then they improve. And it's a lot of fun because the lady from Google, with whom I talked before lunch, she said the same. She said, introspection is very important, so exactly the same thing. And you might say, where's the leadership in this? What if the team finds out we are quite good, but our environment or some of the rules or the processes around us are not fit for the current needs, for a world that's evolving? Maybe this was good 1 year ago or 5 years ago. And that's where leadership comes in, but it gets even better. Leadership is mentioned in the Agile Manifesto, and only when preparing this talk I got aware of this. That if you see this, okay, give people what they need and check what they actually do and create the right environment, that is actually not meant for teams. That's directly for leaders. So leaders have a central role in agility, but often the teaching or what they can do and so on, that's too vague to become effective in this change. And that's the why behind this training. So how did we then do this? And here you see actually 2 former colleagues of us. So this is what happened in late 2020. We were fed up with just working with teams, and we saw more and more the bottleneck or the problems were more on the inter-team environment. And then Camille Schonens, who was then head of MS Acceptance, said, you know what, do it. do something about it, create a training. We said, oh yeah, we are going to do it. So we started the work. Here you see Corinne van den Borchardt, who was a colleague, who was a co-developer of this training. So that was basically the opportunity. So first, okay, we are unhappy with something, but we don't keep on complaining. We start changing it once somebody acts as a sponsor and says, you know what, do it. And how do we develop this? Of course, we started with a lot of ideas and topics, but I said we created it from scratch. We did not take something from outside of Worldline. We had a lot of inspiration. Okay, this is how we started. And then you need to check that whatever you have, of course, fits into a certain time frame. You cannot do a training for 30 hours, and it needs to have a kind of story arc, a narrative. It needs to fit into a time frame so that it comes logical, grouped to bigger themes. And of course, you need to balance stuff that I just tell you compared to, okay, we do something together, because a lot of the learning happens when you actually do the things you just heard about. So you get introduced to a new topic and you do an activity about it. Luckily, modern tools like Miro or Mural and so on are great for working together, for exploring together, for discussing together. And then you also need to get feedback. So we didn't first create the training and then we got feedback. No, we went with the idea list. We showed this to the first leader and said, okay, what do you think about this? And he gave us some pointers, like, oh, we have what to improve, but basically confirming it works. So this is how innovation goes. Get feedback early on to see whether it's actually viable. Does it make sense? And then we showed it to another leader later in a later stage, and he also said, I'm missing this. This is what I find really logical. And we also showed it to a sponsor who also said, this is really good, this is something you could improve, and we always iterated on this. And yes, at some point in time, you need to try it out. You can build a ship, but you need to put it into water to see whether it really works. So we did a pilot in June 2021, and we found that, okay, it does work, the timing works, the story arc, yeah, there's a lot we can improve. But indeed, this works, and as it's written here above, don't think of it like a sequential step. Would be very strange to do something about agility and then doing like this. It's a lot about feedback loops, closing them, noting ideas, and always checking out what's the reaction, what works and what does not work. And one of the things we kept doing was staying alert of whether what we're doing is still relevant. So at several bigger meetings, town halls and so on, we asked people, okay, we presented them 5 of our core topics, for instance here, outcomes over output. And we asked them, what do you think? How are we as Worldline doing on this topic? And how relevant is this? To give them also a chance to tell us, no, we either think this is not relevant or, hey, we think we are doing well on this. We don't need to learn. And you can see here on this picture that this is a distribution, which I find important. I don't like averages. I think the average person doesn't understand what average means. So this is also to show that there might be dissenters or the opinions might be mixed about it. And we kept doing this. And we found there's actually a lot of appetite for a lot of the core topics of the training. Which brings us to the who. For whom is this? And you see a picture of training participants. So this is how it looks like at the end of 4 days. People are still smiling and awake. Anybody who needs to or who wants to learn something about how to lead in a complex environment where agility is one possible approach to it. And that can be somebody who is a former line manager. That can also be somebody who is more of a product person, because product persons also need to lead. Can also be Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, but it can also be a developer, for instance. We don't want to limit us too much to the formal role. It's important that it stays open. And I personally highly prefer that people sign up for it themselves and don't get ordered to it. Now, that brings us to how do we do this? A bit of formal information. On the picture, you see one of the activities. So this is a bit how it works out. I like, this is one of my favorites because we are asking the people of describing how they're spending a lot of their time and what they would rather do. And this sounds like a presupposition, but indeed, a lot of people are telling us, I'm spending my time writing reports or filling in this or doing escalations. I would actually rather spend more time with innovation or coaching people or doing something that's more of a long-term investment instead of firefighting. And we give people the space to express this, and then also to do something at dot voting to see, okay, is this a single opinion or is this a shared opinion? And without judging it by the popularity, because it might be that you are the only one who's experiencing it, but it's very relevant for everybody else and they hear about it. So this is one of the meta messages. We do this on 4 consecutive days, usually for the 1-hour lunch break in between. It's completely online, which has the advantage of bringing people together who usually would not see each other. And then they hear, what, you're having in country X, you're having the same issue as we here? Oh, I never thought about this. And this meta experience of, oh, I'm not alone with the struggles is also very important. It's not the first thing we aim at, but it's very nice to have, I would say. It's up to 20 participants, and you might ask, how can you make an online training on 4 days with 20 participants? How can they get through all of this? The trick is we are using online tools and we're using breakout rooms, so people work in smaller teams of 4 or 5 people in between, and we mix them in different groups so that they have time, so that everybody can speak and they have time to discuss ideas, and then they come back and we discuss it with all 20 of them. There are 2 potential exams. I will come back to that later. I like the exams because it means you can test this, you can compare this to the outside world. You make sure that we are not living in a bubble within Worldline. You can see, okay, this compared to industry standards, this is pretty good. And I know from the experience of people who tried these exams, they are not trivial. And from the people who passed them, they also show the dedication later that they really want to change something. Until now, and it's important to remember, until now, it's only in English, but we might change that in the future, and that's a teaser for later on the presentation. And then one thing about this is, once you have a training, you might think, okay, we're done, great, it's on production basically, but a good training is never done. You always, from every iteration you give, you always learn something new, and that can be through many ways. And one of the things I think that is a bit underrated is the feedback. And here you see on the screen feedback from last week, or from 2 weeks before, when we gave the last edition of the training, and we got some pointers. Without reading all of it, we came to the conclusion we want to do a bit more about evidence-based management, for instance. And this is really valuable, because if you do such a training every month, you learn a lot, and you can do a lot of iterations to fine-tune it and to change it to new needs that come up, to new people who have other opinions or other experiences. Sometimes we get email reactions as well. Sometimes people come back to us. We also take notes. We give this training with 2 trainers, so we take notes during the training and we see, okay, where's the flow not so good? Where were people struggling with? Sometimes they need to struggle with things. Otherwise, if you just tell them what they already know, it's easy to digest. It's also not good, but where is basically where might people have been lost or confused? How can we make it easier? And this, usually we have 2 sessions before every training and afterwards, so we really invest the time to make it better, make it better, make it better. Now it's the first time I want to check whether everybody is still awake and participating. I'm asking to the crowd, let's see whether I can get 2 or 3 ideas. How would you measure the success of such a training, of an Agile Leadership Training? I get a deafening silence. So I must say the paella was good. So compliments to the kitchen. So my spoiler would be, okay, the best way to measure whether an Agile Leadership Training was effective would be if indeed the leader then says, okay, I'm going to change something about the organization. The trickiness of this is twofold. Number one, that's a lagging indicator. That takes a lot of time. If you want to change something that's deeply rooted in the organization, a process or something that's done on a group level, yeah, that is very tricky to change. So that's the one tricky thing about. The other thing is, this is not a linear cause and effect relationship. It's not that you go to a training and you know nothing. After 16 hours you say, now I know everything and now I change everything. No training in the world is going to change your world like this. It's very unrealistic. Usually it's a whole it's a whole set of different influences. Maybe you already see that something wrong and somebody else tells you. Then you go to a training, then maybe somebody else supports you. Then you see an opportunity. So it's a lot of factors, and you cannot say, because I did the training, now this has been changed. So what could you do? You use leading indicators and you use proxy metrics. What are proxy metrics? Yeah, I mentioned 2 exams. We like to measure, okay, how many people have taken this exam, and do we get updates? Do we get them by the people via email? Are they telling us, oh, I passed the exam, thank you for that. It's really nice, by the way. Sometimes they also post it on LinkedIn, which I find also a strong indicator, because they show to their social professional network, this is what I find important. That's also an indicator. We ask people, would you recommend this training to somebody like you, if you're a leader, or would you recommend this training to a leader? Those are 2 different questions, then it's relevant to ask 2 different ones. So basically a kind of net promoter score. Net promoter score is interesting within a set of measures. As a single measure, it's not so good, because you could also go down the wrong road of saying we make something that everybody likes, which is not always something that you need to hear. So you need to balance it, and it might make you risk averse, and you don't want to risk lowering your net promoter score, so you don't put in things that might upset people. So it's tricky. You can also measure how many people reach out to you by email and say directly, thanks for the training, that was really nice. I mean, they have a chance to say that at the end of the training, so if you take the extra effort, that means something. You can also measure, do people contact you for follow-up engagements outside of the training? It means they think you're competent and that what you told them was valuable, so that's also good. And maybe you see that they are doing something different. But as I said, it's tricky to measure. It's tricky to measure a direct relationship, and it would be very arrogant to think that you turn everything around. Usually it's more a cooperation, long-term effects. It's more a kind of investment. Like education, even basic education is also an investment. If you go to elementary school, you will not be perfect for the world after 1 year. Now, then let's talk a bit about the what. This is basically the agenda. We're talking about why would you want to work in an agile way. I find this very important, because if you cannot tell why you would want to work in an agile way, you could also not tell when you would not want to work in an agile way. And that's the difference between somebody who likes an idea and somebody who follows an ideology. An ideology can never be proven wrong. An idea can. And that's what I find very important, that you know the limits of an approach. When is it not the best time? When do you really need to check out whether it's the right thing? And then evidence-based management, that's a topic I already mentioned. That would be a complete session on its own to explain more about it. Spoiler alert, the evidence-based management guide has been updated this month, and you can download it for free. So that's the really cool thing, and it's one of the most interesting things I saw in the last years, specifically for leaders. Then of course we talk about people and teams, so what's important about a team, what's important about people. That should not be something new for somebody who has people responsibility. But then, of course, okay, how do you handle the case if you need more than one team, which is most of the time the case. And the agile leader, him or herself, we put this to the last because, as the saying goes, leaders eat last. And everything stands and falls actually with agile leaders. So it's not a trivial thing, but we save it for last, because an agile leader basically needs to be aware of all the other topics up front, and you can see what do you need to change in individual behavior knowing all of this. So it's a bit like the bottom line. And then we have a parking lot, which I find also an interesting element, because we encourage people to ask questions we do not tackle in the training or that might be out of the flow, to come up with topics that are not core topics, but where we think we have an answer or some interesting advice. And you can also measure whether the session of the day is good by seeing how engaged are people on the parking lot. Now, I promised to show some of the some of the content, and this is called Carnarvon. That's a word in Welsh, and Carnarvon. This is basically the short answer to when and why would you want to work in an agile way. We're not covering this here today, but if you have never heard about it, keep the name Carnarvon in your memory. That's the important takeaway. And I mentioned evidence-based management, and evidence-based management basically says you cannot have long-term plans that are also detailed. You can set goals at different levels. You need to have a strategy. You need to have strategic goals. You need to have intermediate goals, and you need to have immediate tactical goals. And the short-term goals are always an indicator of, are you on the way to reach the longer-term goals? And if not, okay, what do you want to do now? And they work actually with feedback loops. They also work with key value areas that you see here and key value indicators. Basically, how could you measure that you're improving on what you want to improve? And it all starts really with, where's your problem? Where do you think currently your challenge is within the business? As I said, that would be a topic for a talk on its own. I want to mention it because I find it very important. And then eco-cycle. This is something I think is underrated. People talk a lot about building new stuff, but they never talk about retiring stuff. So intentionally destroying things that are no longer worth maintaining because the maintenance costs are more than actually the stuff you get out of it, the value you get out of it. And looking at activities, products, features, whatever you're doing, and putting them on the eco cycle and seeing, oh, maybe this is now becoming harder and harder to maintain, and maybe we should intentionally retire it before the market does it. And then, yeah, we have somebody from Google here. There was a very interesting Google study 9 years ago about what makes a successful team. And they found out one thing, that psychological safety was the most important factor in team success. It was not individual talent or capacity or whatever. It was about, okay, are people safe to voice their concerns? Do they feel safe to bring up ideas that might sound crazy? Are they ridiculed or not? There's also the author Amy C. Edmondson that explored this. And I recently had I had a discussion with somebody within Worldline who said, no, first you do performance, then you can be trusted. And I said, no, first you need to be trusted, then the performance comes. And finally, this is also a great one. This is from Management 3.0. This is called delegation poker. So whenever we are talking about empowering people, giving people decision power, people tell us, yeah, but I cannot give the team the power about this. They cannot decide this on their own. And we say, yeah, no problem. It's not about I decided on my own as a leader to the team decides it on their own. I have no power. There are many shades in between. And we ask people actually about several topics. Okay, how do you do this right now? And the trickiness or the beauty of this is there are no right or wrong answers. We just want to show them, okay, there are many ways how you can approach the same topic, and there are many shades in between, like I ask the team for their opinion and then I decide, or the team decides and they tell me later how they solved it, and there are many ways how you could tackle the same question depending on your context. And there's no right or wrong. And instead of doing radical switches, you can try this out. You can even play this with your teams. And they can tell you, we think this is the right level of delegation. And you can say, okay, I think this is it. And you might find out, okay, there are overlaps. We don't need to discuss it. And there can be bigger differences. Okay, that could be points of conflict, and you know about them. Now, after this training, we identified additional opportunities. Some came up earlier, but some came up basically as a reaction to it. And one of them was, we do a 2-hour Agile workshop. That's just about why Agile. This is 2 hours long. We took some topics out of the whole training, and we do this with leadership teams. The idea is that before you invest in 16 hours of training where you need to block your calendar, you can take a dip into it and see, okay, how does it go? Do I understand the most important topics of this? I will say that the then head of quality, security, and risk, so from the group level management, came into the Agile Leadership Training and did all of the 16 hours. So it's not a kind of, okay, if I'm high enough, I can only do 2 hours. It also works like this. We have done this with several leadership teams, with a QSR team, for instance, on group level. We have done this with the DC management team, for instance, the digital commerce team, and the results are very promising. People like what they heard. It was still interactive. They learned something, and you're always open for new things based on that. And then this is the thing, this is the advantage of an internal training. If you book an external training, you have those people, you attend something for 1 or 2 days, and then you go back to your work. And if you want to change a habit, this is the worst way you can do it. A one-time injection of new ideas, that usually is very hard to maintain. So we invite former training participants into sessions where they can bring their topics, their challenges, their questions, whatever has come up in the meantime, and they discuss it among themselves in a form that's called a conversation cafe. That's a liberating structure. So instead of one person talking all the time, like me right now, people are again in smaller groups, and they take turns on talking about a specific topic which they can choose, and they can see, okay, what are the different views on it, opinions, experiences, and they can take away something. Basically, it's a peer-to-peer exchange of experience, which I like a lot. And finally, there are the Agile coaching moments. They are every other week, and I think the next one will be next Friday, so not tomorrow. This is done by Peter Fabrascott, which is our direct colleague, and Pietro Maffi from Financial Services. I mention this here because I hear a lot of time it's so difficult to collaborate cross GBL, and this is an example of, hey, it's not difficult. We found a way to do it. And I show Pietro's picture here and also his name because I think he also deserves the credit. We have been working together since November 2020. He's a very good colleague. We align on a lot of these topics. And this is basically, if you say, I have personally a specific problem or challenge or an opportunity in my environment, what can I do? And then you get coaching on your own on this. And you have 2 different Agile coaches that can help you with this, that can give you some ideas on what to do. And I think it's a very decent follow-up. Now, now we go to topics that you cannot tackle within 16 hours of training to go a bit deeper. And this is a bit about, okay, are we coaches teaching you swimming but don't go into the water? Well, of course it's the opposite. We live what we teach. Here's one thing. This is called the unfixed model. So basically the challenge is, okay, you've learned something about agility and what you should do, and you understand you need to change the organizational setup to serve your customers better. To serve to evolving market needs, customer needs, you need to change something. How could you do this? This is cumbersome, and this is basically a counterexample. You can draw a simple model of your organization and what you want to change. And the beauty of this, what you see here, this is actually a model of FS issuing the Horizon platform. So this is a real life example of what was done elsewhere in Worldline. Amongst others, with the help of Pietro Maffi, who was one of the people. So this is the unfixed model that will help you, okay, how could you reorganize? Leadership can set the boundaries, what is absolutely important for the organization. Can do this design, can get some feedback, you can iterate, you can build different prototypes of the organization. And then you can do a marketplace, which is a kind of self-selection event, where up to 200 people, for instance, can come there and say, I want to work on this team, I want to work on this team. Leadership checks, okay, how much are the boundaries respected that we set? And you do 2 or 3 rounds within 2 hours, and afterwards, 90% of the people can say, I chose my own workplace. So you have the right balance between leadership saying, this is and people choosing their own workplace. So I find this really cool. And then in the end, you need to do kickoff events with the teams, because you will have newly formed teams. You can do this every 6 months. We have done this already within Worldline, where you react to changing market needs, changing customer needs. And you can kick off the teams and say, okay, how do you as a newly formed team want to work together? We have done this already in Worldline. It all works out. It is definitely possible. The unfixed model is pretty new. It's from January 2023. And as Worldline, we're actually one of the pioneers. So the unfixed community is very interested in hearing our story. We have already been featured on their blog, and they even want to invite us for more. And then there are other topics like, how do I set... That was my timer, sorry. How do I set goals? We can do this with OKRs. We are experienced with objectives and key results. We are preparing a training, for instance, for value streams. We are also looking into empowered product teams, the model of Marty Kagan, the product operating model. I don't want to dive too deep into this. There are also things we have not tackled, and that's the cultural iceberg. These are my own words. There are many ways this can be drawn, but you can change the teams, you can change job titles and so on, but there are also things that are a lot deeper. Those are values, those are things that people believe, who have the power, of course. You cannot change this immediately. So a training can help you above the waterline and just below the waterline. Of course, a training will not be able to tackle all of this. It will only be as effective as the parts below this are tackled as well. Then the training works really well. And then we also have some things we have not been able to resolve yet. I put there on the screen our best bet so far. So there are things like, you know the saying of the Bible, the prophet has no recognition in his own country of origin. Yeah, that's also true for us. So the more I'm away from my own home turf, home office, and so on, the more recognition I get. The other people still remember me as a developer. Or people who say, if you work with teams, maybe you're not such an interesting partner with management. It's a pity, and you need to tackle it. Or people who say, Agile is dead. It's currently very popular on LinkedIn, but popular doesn't mean right, and so on. I don't want to dive too much into this, into problems, because I would rather come to this. So where could you go from here? Well, the easiest option is you could be a participant. You can sign up via My Learning. We will decide about training dates for the second half of the year, later this year, so I don't feature them now, because if you're watching the recording, it will be outdated. But if you're interested, if this is also your topic, you could also become a trainer. We often have co-trainers from somewhere else who then also get training experience. Maybe you're interested, I mean, we are in Madrid here, you're interested in doing this in another language, and this is where Pablo Sanchez comes in. If we have enough demand, we might do this in other languages. We will translate the slides. We've done this for other trainings. Just last week, we had a product management with Scrum training, for instance, in Spanish. So we can do this. We will be happy to do this. We just need to measure the demand. And maybe you want to learn by another way of learning. I feature here a book that came out only after we started. I really like it. Or you have a completely different idea. Then contact us. That would be it from my side. Thanks for your attention. Muchas gracias.